Welcome to the second session of Lightning Protection Risk Assessment. So, before considering whether a structure requires lightning protection or not, the first and foremost important step is to carry out a detailed lightning protection risk assessment as per the guidelines mentioned in IEC 62305 Part 2. Now, to this context, it is very important to know that the guidelines of IEC 62305-2 for risk assessment is quite an exhaustive one, and the actual risk assessment can only be envisaged if all the factors which are mentioned in the standard are taken into consideration to conclude on whether the calculated risk is greater than the tolerable risk or not. For the sake of simplification, in many cases, many parameters are not considered, which should ideally not be the case for the actual risk assessment calculation. The structure which shall be considered for risk assessment shall include the structure itself, installations to the structure, contents of the structure, persons in the structure or in zone up to 3 meters from outside the structure, environmental impacts due to damage to the structure. So here in the right hand side, my cursor is floating the flowchart for the risk assessment. So first we need to identify the structure which is to be protected. Identify the type of loss relevant to the structure to be protected Rn. Then R1, which is the risk of human life, R2 the risk of loss of service to public, or R3 risk of loss of cultural heritage has to be identified, that what is the risk that can occur due to this lightning protection. Accordingly, for each loss to be considered, the tolerable level of risk RT is calculated by a formula. For each loss to be considered, identify and calculate the risk components RZ that makes up the Rn total risk, which is the summation of all RA, RB, RC, RM, RU, RV, RW, RZ risk. And then finally, the calculated risk is a summation of all the risk factors. And if the calculated risk is less than equal to the tolerable risk, then structure is adequately protected for this type of loss. If it's not, then we have to install protection measures to reduce the calculated risk. So this is how ideally a risk assessment is done in the lightning protection design. So now let us look into the type of source of damage, type of damage, and type of loss. So basically, based on the point of strike, the type of or the source of damage is identified. So if there is a direct lightning strike that is happening in a building or structure, the source of damage is regarded as S1. If the direct lightning strike happens just beside next to the structure, then the source of damage is considered as S2. And if the lightning strike directly happens on the line which is entering the particular equipment or structure, then the damage is named as S3 respectively. And if the lightning strike happens onto the ground above which the overhead line is entering the equipment or the structure, is regarded as S4. Now, based on the source of damage S1, S2, S3 and S4 respectively, the type of damages are identified. Means if source of damage is S1, it can give rise to 3 types of damages, which is D1, D2 and D3 respectively. And each damage can consecutively result to a loss which is L1, L4 for D1 case. For D2, the losses can be L1, L2, L3 and L4. This L1, L2, L3, L4, what it represents, we will be seeing in our forthcoming slides. Similarly, type of damage D3 under S1 source of damage can lead to loss of L1, L2 and L4. If the source of damage is S2, then the damage possible can only be D3 in this case, which can consecutively lead to the loss L1, L2 and L4 respectively. If the source of damage is S3, this can again give rise to damage D1, D2 and D3, the same way we seen for source of damage S1. And each damage can lead D1 to L1 and L4. D2 damage can lead to losses L1, L2, L3 and L4. And D3 damage can lead to loss of L1, L2 and L4 respectively. Source of damage S4 can only give rise to damage D3 the way it is seen for S2 and eventually can lead to loss of L1, L2 and L4. So S1 is direct lightning strike to the building or structure. S2 is lightning strike to the earth near the building or structure. S3 is direct lightning strike to the entering supply line. S4 is the lightning strike to the earth close to entering the supply line. Type of damage D1 is electric shock to living beings as a result of contact and step voltage. D2 is fire, explosion, mechanical and chemical reactions as a result of physical effects of lightning discharge. D3 is the failure of electrical and electronic systems as a result of surges. Type of loss L1 is injury or death of persons. L2 is loss of services for the public. L3 is loss of irreplaceable cultural assets. And L4 is economic losses. So the values of tolerable risk as defined in IEC 62305. So if the type of loss is L1, which is loss of human life or permanent injuries, the tolerable risk is 10 to the power minus 5. So if the loss is L2, that is loss of service to public, then the tolerable risk is 10 to the power minus 3. If the loss type is L3, that is loss of cultural heritage, the tolerable risk is 10 to the power minus 4. And finally, if the type of loss is L4, which is loss of economic value, structure, content and loss of activity, the tolerable risk is 10 to the power minus 3.